Hi, this is Kevin, Math Practical. This is lecture 6 in the series from Advanced Cartographic Design. And today we're going to talk about Masters of Light. One of the goals in cartography is to emulate the natural landscape. And we generally do that in our maps with shaded relief. Shaded relief being the combination of a hypsometric tint and a hillshade that is a model of how light would fall across the landscape. Well, landscape painters have been doing this for centuries. So if we want to make our maps beautiful, then we want to emulate the masters. So in this particular image right here, what makes this image powerful? Well, of course, it's the depiction of the light. All right, so you're looking at a sunset or a sunrise with this silhouetted aircraft coming towards you, but the subtle light over the waves in the ocean, the beautiful sunbeams, the clouds, the colors of the light, the temperature of the light, it all sets the scene and gives us something that is aesthetically pleasing that we want to stare at and look at. We want the same reaction for our maps. So, the colors of light are super important when we're thinking about depicting relief. So the single most important factor when we're trying to figure out what colors should be shown on our maps is what the light source is, right? It is light which allows us to experience color, as we talked about before, and light that unites all of the colors. The color literally comes from the light, but light can be different, right? The second most important thing is the location of the light source. So this drives the perception of all the highlights and shadows in the image, and this is what gives it a depth, right, that brings it into a 3D reality, even though we're painting on a flat surface. And then lastly, we have to remember that not all the light is the same, right? Different light sources have different temperatures. Early morning light is different than afternoon light or storm light, right? And these colors will look different under different conditions, right? So as we paint or create our shaded relief for our maps, we want to take into consideration both the light source, its temperature, and its location. So let's get some inspiration, right? We're going to go to the masters and look at what they did. But first, looking along the color schemes, you can really see what the different temperatures of light might be during the different parts of the day. Say you're painting by candlelight versus a sunset versus a light bulb, right? Versus a morning, evening sun and that kind of nice, perfect yellow. Moonlight can be yellow to white. To midday sun is usually bright right over top, right, with not very many shadows, and then cloudy days or a clear blue sky. And those light temperatures reflect throughout the scene. Let's see how the masters did it. Monet, right? Doesn't get much better than that for landscape painting. Fantastic, beautiful shot, and always ask yourself, where is the light source? In this particular case, it's in the upper right-hand corner. Sunbeams are coming down this way, hitting the face of the mountain, and then leaving shadows behind, right? What is the temperature of the light? It has some yellows to it, so it could be an early morning or a late afternoon shot, maybe sunrise or sunset. I'm thinking because it's brighter, it's probably late afternoon. And then also, you can get a sense of, is it a totally clear day, or is there some diffuse water vapor in the air with the blues used in the shadows, right? I'm going to ruin painting for you for the rest of your life. Every time you look at a painting now, you're always going to ask, where's the light source and what temperature is the light? But I think that's good. It helps us understand what the artist was thinking when they painted the painting. Another Monet, this one I just love, right? So the seascape, the artist is standing in the shadows below the cliffs, but the light is coming down low and just hitting the top of this rock pinnacle. You see the reflection, and it's that orange, yellowish light, so it must be sunset. But these boats out here in the far distance are still in full sunshine, right? Fantastic use of light. Van Gogh. Van Gogh gets a little tougher, right? He can be a little abstract, but still very interesting when you see the walls and then the trees and then these buildings. There's not too much in the way of shadow, so maybe the light source is right behind the artist, and it kind of seems that way because these faces facing right towards them in the mountains, they're highlighted and the shadows fall behind them. But sometimes they were using abstract light sources, or the light source changed over the course of painting. So you imagine they're standing out in a field and they're painting, and the clouds are moving through and the sun is going across the sky. And sometimes you see that reflected in how they painted the landscape. Here's another Van Gogh, which is a little bit easier to see, right? So you've got a diffuse light source, so not a hard line of shadow on the hill, but it's highlighting this hillside, so the light source would be in the upper left, right? A little bit of shadow to the other side of this hill here, but definitely more of a cloudy, maybe stormy day, right? Because the light isn't so hard and crisp, and there's bluish tints and so forth that are mixed into the greens. Wind blowing the grass around just sets this feel to it, right? I want my maps to be able to speak like this painting can. Starry night, ultimate. Where's the light source in this one? Well, it's in the painting, right? This big, beautiful moon over there in the upper right, and it's shining down on the village, and you can see in the lines of the trees whether you have highlights and shadows as the trees go along the boulevard, and then that one face of the church with the steeple, right? So even in total darkness, you can use light to set a scene. Winters, a very nice landscape painting. You see the shadows for the trees here. You see the nice highlighted face, so where's the light source? Upper left, right? Shadows and ravines. What period? This kind of seems to me like it could be midday to mid-afternoon. So starting to get a little bit longer shadows, but definitely kind of a nice, clean, whiter light. Well, what about this one, Annabelle? This is a nice one. Where's the light source? Upper right, coming this way onto the face, but look at the color of that hillside. Pinks, right? Where are you going to get pink? Maybe nice, fresh morning sunrise or a deep sunset pink, right? And then little reflections in the pond and so forth. Just giving you a really, really nice use of light and color. And then, of course, O'Keeffe. Now, O'Keeffe can really fool you. O'Keeffe will give you some very, very interesting light sources. So where's the light source? Well, it depends where you look in this painting. If we look at the peak in the back, right, it's nice and lit up, but that's sunlight over here in the upper left. But if we look at this kind of peak in the foreground, you have this side lighted with the shadows on the other side, so it has a light source that's over to the right. And maybe she painted this over the course of an entire day, and the light source has changed, right? You also have kind of what seems to be midday light in the foreground, dark kind of foreboding light from a storm or something in the midground, and then in the back, almost twilight with this kind of purple haze. Very, very cool representation of the landscape. Here's O'Keeffe, early morning fog, very diffuse light, right? Maybe you can see the sun is low, but off to the right, and then you're seeing some highlights and shadows. Almost difficult to find, precisely pick out the light source location, but certainly a low light, low temperature situation with blues and purples. Come on, there we go. And then Bedshot. So these are like the realists, right? Very, very realistic painting with lots of light, usually heavy clouds, kind of a stormy scene. These are famous paintings because they have this iconic valley, which many people think represents Yosemite Valley, right, in California. And this peak is really prominent, and it could be that they're emulating El Capitan, right, in the valley. Sometimes you have waterfalls coming off of it that don't actually exist in life, and you can see this whole landscape is one set. And let's look at just another realist painting. Here it is with almost the same layout, El Capitan with the waterfall, but then a castle, right, on top of a rock outcrop in the middle, and then a full version of peaks in the back that could be the Dolomites or the Alps. Where's the light source on this one? Well, you can really see it, right? So it must be up here in the upper left because you can see it on the faces and the mountains in the back. You can see it on the faces of the castle here. A little bit of reflection glint in the lake. Pretty cool. So watching these masters, we can learn a lot. We should always be asking ourselves, where's the light source and what temperature is the light? Moran. If you're ever visited the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone and you see Yellowstone Falls in this one, you know that this must be early morning light because the falls face the east and the light appears to be coming right up the valley and really giving us highlights right in front of us, kind of behind the artist. Moran traveled all over the West and even went to Europe and made beautiful images, but look what he's done here. So this is the Grand Canyon with all that diffuse light and mist, right? Shadows, highlights, purples, the red of the rocks. I want to emulate that when I do a shaded relief of the Grand Canyon, right? So I'm inspired by the work of these master landscape painters. I'm also inspired by the work of this young man.
Let's do it. I'm going to take the knife here.
Well, we lost Bob a couple of years ago, but he's certainly with us in spirit. Countless hours of beautiful work like that on the internet. They recently found a warehouse with all of his paintings just stacked up in a row. It must be worth quite a bit. I hope it gets donated to a museum somewhere. So how do we do this ourselves? Where do we start? Well, we don't have to start doing master landscape painting. We can look to just pen and ink is a good place to start. The Japanese had very simplistic, nice use of light, right? But always, again, ask yourself, where's the light source? Even if you don't have any color, so you don't have to worry about the temperature of the light, you can just look to make your highlights and shadows, right? The Chinese also had beautiful landscape paintings done in this fashion. Where would the light source be on this one? Well, somewhere kind of up in the upper right on this guy coming across, highlighting all these faces and then the shadows behind, right? And you could just take some time and just take a pencil and a white piece of paper, because you've got half of your art already done for you on a white piece of paper, right? If you're dealing with a white piece of paper, then all the highlights are already there for you, so you just need to define the shadows. So just take some time and just draw some ridges of mountains, and then think about where the shadow would go after you place your light source. So in this case, we place the light source in the upper right. And just add some more pencil strokes to give some more shadow. The more you add, the deeper the canyon is, the darker the shadow. You can do this, of course, with pen and ink, right? By squiggling more in the shadow areas, you define the shadows. All the white space that is left over, that's obviously your highlights, right? And as you get better, you can work it into charcoal. You can work with smudging. You can work with just taking your thumb and pushing the pencil graphite around on the paper, or even using a piece of tissue paper to kind of give you that diffuse idea, like Bob Ross was using his paintbrush to move the paint around. You can get quite competent at creating nice landscapes with just a pencil and a white piece of paper. Eventually, though, you might become an expert. All right, like this Schultz painting here. Incredible work in the Dolomites, and where you see this little ridge of snow left over. Obviously, light sources coming from the far right over there, coming in, and then you've got this little shadowed bit of snow behind it, and of course that's also represented on all the rocks. Incredible. We should look to nature, though, to get our inspiration as well. All right, so if we're going to be making planar, top-down looking maps, and we're going to be doing nice shaded relief, we should look at aerial photographs and see how light plays out. Here's a canyon in a tropical area, maybe Hawaii. Light is over on the right-hand side, coming across, hard ridge line here. You can see the deep shadows of the canyon, and then coming across and filling. Always look to these natural representations of light so that we know what we want to emulate, right? Or straight overhead on a nice ocean scene with this boat that is sunk. How do we know if this boat was on top of the water or below the water? Well, depending on how you put the blue over the top of it, and then of course shadows too, and then the shadows of the pylons of the little dock. All right. What about this oblique, right? So here you have this hillside, must be low light. There's long shadows on some of the trees, and that whole little dish back there is just covered in shadow. Obviously, we can see where the light source is, kind of like mid-afternoon coming in. Or this nice shot, right? So where's the light source here? Well, this appears to be kind of lower left, coming this way. This cool little bay in there is totally in shadow, which means that this little ridge of rock must be higher than it seems. So you can learn a lot by looking at the light and the shadow. Color of it, kind of bright white, but maybe a little bit low in the sky because it is dropping so much shadow into the little bay there. I just want to go explore that little place. And even the most barren landscapes can give you fascinating insight into how light plays across a landscape. Every time I fly in an airplane, you can guarantee I'm going to try and get the window seat. And if it's a clear view from the time it takes off until the time it lands, I'm looking out that window at the landscape. I love it when I go to Europe and I fly over Greenland and I get to look down and see that ice cap with all those blue shadows and little rock outcrops, nunateks popping up through the ice. It's incredible, right? And I just stash all that in the back of my mind so that when I get into Photoshop, Illustrator, and my cartographic workflows, I can try and emulate those things. So even the master shaded relief painters, the guys who used to do it all by hand, right? They had to set a light source. So for the entire world, they had to set a light source here. And if you look at the Great Rocky Mountains, where's the light source? Where's the shadow? It's on the east side, so we must have had a light source in the upper northwest, right? And that had to be carried across the whole entire world. So you see the same thing on this north-south running Andes range, but then over on the Himalaya, it's more of an east-west, and you see a slight difference in the amount of shadow, all right? We can emulate this as we play with watercolors. So we can look at pen and ink, like this just cool drawing of the Rockies right around Colorado, and then using different colors of the watercolor in order to change our highlight and shadows. Experiment, play, right? There's a group out of San Francisco called Stamen Design, and they've created an entire world watercolor palette that now you can load as the background into ArcGIS maps, all right? So there's a link to it in this presentation, but there's their version of San Francisco. Just interesting use of color and light. So take some time and take a white piece of paper, maybe do some pen and ink, some pencil work, draw some mountains, and then work with your watercolors and draw some landscapes. Get a feel for color and light source. Even in this simple watercolor, we can see a light source, right? Upper right coming down, lighter purple here, darker purple there. Or a fall scene, right? Another upper right-hand color or right-hand light source with beautiful fall colors, highlights here, shadows on that side, even on the rocks down at the bottom. Being consistent will help your images look more realistic, right? So once you set your light source, try and carry it throughout the entire scene. I give you guys a couple of links to people who show you exactly how to paint just a simple landscape, just a set of background mountains, foreground mountains, or midground mountains, foreground trees, and super foreground kind of grass. The whole thing could probably take you about 10 minutes, but it teaches you quite a bit. Using different colors to represent the shadows, purples and blues, right? Very diffuse light on this one. Where's the light source? Maybe hard to tell, it's so abstract, but still fun, and you learn a lot from it. Because what we're after eventually is shaded relief. So next week, we're going to go deep into how we generate the best shaded relief we can in the digital workflow and how we can try to emulate some of the shaded relief masters in the world of cartography, who of course were inspired by the landscape masters that we looked at today. So in order to make a shaded relief image in a planner mode like this, all you need is a white piece of paper and then just draw the ridge lines in a pencil. Just draw a few ridge lines that run up to peaks and then peel off from each other, and then set a light source, right? And think about where the light beams would come across this landscape, and take your pencil and just work on filling in the shadows behind the highlighted ridges, right? The white is going to take care of all of your highlights already, the white paper, so you're just taking care of the shadows. So really you are just a shadow sculptor in an image like this. And then we will take this and make it the hillshade in the back and start adding different successive layers of hypsometric tint, whether it's based on elevation, based on light temperature, or based on some thematic style to give our maps the look that we want, right? So we can start out without any illumination, just a simple grayscale hillshade, and just adding a tint of yellow as if some nice low sunlight was coming across the landscape can really give it a different look. And then we add some hypsometric tints to elevation or as a nod to different vegetation, land cover across the landscape. And then you get a really nice product that's super beautiful. We'll look at a lot of resources coming up next week, but I think shaderrelief.com is one that you would really enjoy looking at, talking about just how much it changes the overall look of a map when we add different tints of light to it, starting from that kind of just regular old blue-gray, light gray hillshade to a little bit of gray-violet, to a little bit of blue, some yellows and even pinks, and you go from a fairly plain, normal map that you would see in everyday, cartography, to something that really becomes a work of art. And then you end up with a landscape that is emulating what it might look during sunset in the Swiss Alps, and you really work with your natural landscape first and just make this look really nice. And then when you lay all of your vector work over the top of it, it gives you a completely unique and incredible look that hopefully we can emulate with our digital workflow as good as some of the masters like Imhoff did in a hand-painted relief scenario, okay? So that's all I have for you today. If this video was helpful, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next week when we get into the masters of shaded relief and look at some of the sources that they were inspired by. Thank you.